I'm Jim Collison, and live from our virtual studios around the world, at least today in the United States. We have a virtual audience around the world. This is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on March 5th, 2021. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you are listening live, love to have you join us in our chat room. There's actually a link right above me there on our live page that'll take you to our YouTube page, and there's a chat room there. Just sign in with your Google account. We'd love to have you in there with your questions. If you have questions after the fact, maybe you're listening to this as a podcast and it's not today and you're not live, we'd love to have that question as well. Send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app if you want to do it that way, or you can subscribe to us on YouTube, get notified every time is something new. Dawn Landry is our guest today. She's the CEO and founder of Authenticity, and she's the author of Armored. We'll talk about that a little bit later, a memoir of inspirational and practical life strategies. And I think everybody could use a little bit of inspiration and practical life strategies at this point. Dawn's top 5 is input, competition, significance, ideation, and individualization. Dawn, welcome to Called to Coach, and we're glad that you're here today.
Thank you, Jim. I'm really excited to be here.
We are excited to have you, and I think let's just get started with a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about your background, who you are, what you're doing, maybe a little bit of experience that you've had in the past.
Absolutely. So I'm from South Louisiana, so born and raised, but I've been in Houston for 20 years now. And so my background is in public relations. That's how I was trained in school. And if I reflected back in terms of my career, I can go back to the very first class that I had in PR 101. And my advisor asked, "Are you a king or are you a kingmaker?" And that was in 1991, that long ago. And as I look back on it now, my whole career has not been about being king, even though I do have significance as number 3. I have been about being a kingmaker. So whether it's in a PR kind of role, or I did business development with technical teams, primarily like in the commercial construction industry. So within the United States with a national general contractor, as well as with an international contractor based out of London for a time, and then started my business Authenticity 4 years ago, and really have become really honed that kingmaker aspect of things as I have leveraged Gallup CliftonStrengths and being a coach to allow the technical folks that I work with to discover their strengths overall. So that's kind of how I sum it up, is that kingmaker kind of mentality that I have that's kind of follows me even in the personal life that I have.
I like it. I like that. I may steal that from you. Are you a king or a kingmaker? That's a good,
Exactly.
That's a really good question. As a Gallup certified coach, we've been saying lately, or I've been saying lately, this Top 5 Friday. So as you think about your top 5 and you think about your coaching, what are you leaning into of those themes in your top 5? What do you lean into hardest or most in your coaching practice, do you think?
Most in the last 4 years have been individualization and input. And so nothing is boilerplate for me, which is fantastic, but it's also very, it can drive you crazy, right? Mm-hmm. Because I try not to boilerplate anything. So everything wants to be customized. And then the input, of course, I've been very, very blessed in that I have just had this tremendous success, even right out the chute, in starting my company. And that's all from leveraging the relationships and the connections that I have, not only in Houston, but really kind of nationwide as well.
You kind of admitted to me in the pre-show, you have low harmony, low empathy. I think some folks feel like that's necessary for coaching. Like, how do you overcome that as a coach? How do you kind of well, first of all, I don't think it's necessary. Like, let's just be really, really clear. There's no themes that are that way. But in that setting, how would you characterize your coaching style?
So it is something that I have competition as number 2. So when you are a coach and you have so many strong influencing, and then command is number 6 for me. So you have so many strong influencing strengths. It's having that self-awareness that you have to throttle back. And not always is it a coaching assignment, is a consulting assignment. If it's a true coaching assignment, then I have to allow the person that I'm coaching to be able to get to their thoughts actually, and not always impose my own, experience, opinions, whatever it is that kind of goes along with it. The coaching that, the way that I do that, not having the empathy and the harmony, is really to lean on my ideation, which is number 4.
Okay. Yeah. Man, it's a beautiful way to kind of look at that, right? And to think through. I have ideation, my top 5, and I do spend a lot of time helping people. In fact, I had a partner, Ed Gallup, and she used to say to me, "Give me 3 ideas. I have this problem. I need 3 ideas." Like you, me, given the chance to ideate for a while, you could probably ideate for most of the afternoon, right?
Oh yeah.
And so that was our agreement. Is she would just say, "Give me 3," so that I would stop, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a great
Exactly.
one of those great team things that we would come up with we'd approach that. You have a team. Your husband, his name is Darren, right? And
yes.
And let's talk. He's pivotal to the conversation we're going to have today. So not often does the spouse get brought in top 5, but this is kind of important. So let's talk about how long you've been married. Talk a little bit about Darren. How'd you guys meet? Some of those kinds of things, and then I think your 2 top 5s are instrumental to this. So maybe bring his top 5 in as well.
Sure. So we have been friends. In January, it was 25 years that we became friends. And so we worked in a business environment in Lafayette, Louisiana together. He can tell you what I was wearing at this business function that we went to that year. I don't remember meeting him for another 6 months. And so it was just kind of funny how I was in another relationship and my blinders were on. So then we were friends for 3 years. We dated for 22 years. We dated for 5 years. It's been 22 years. And then we've been married for 17 years. And so a long history, very steeped in terms of foundation of friendship and just really good communication. And we've been through a lot of challenges, emotional challenges in terms of before even we were married, in terms of, losing loved ones that we had, financial challenges in terms of, it being the early 2000s. And so the .com crisis and lots of other, financial related, career related challenges in our early 30s. And then most importantly, health related challenges. And so here's this amazingly healthy guy who works out a lot and doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, hasn't his entire life, eats skinless, boneless chicken breasts, every day, works out sometimes twice a day. And unfortunately, genetics wise, he just has had some major health challenges. Even before, he had one issue like that brought him to the ICU before we were even married. And then he had cancer when we were 38 years old. And then in 2019, when we were 48, he suffered a stroke. And so lots of those challenges overall, but knowing our strengths. And so he also has significance, which is his number 3. And when we found that out, it was very interesting because I thought, well, how do our significances not kind of butt up against each other? But the reality is we appreciate one another for the fact that we both see it. We both use that strength in different ways, but we can celebrate one another in a different kind of way that other people can't because we share significance.
Yeah. Any other, as you think about that discovery, let's kind of go back. Did you do it at the same time? Was it something you did before him? How did that work?
I did mine before he did. And actually, he was actually surprised at competition. When I took it the first time, competition was number 1. And then it came when I did it again 5 years later. I had a lot of life changes that happened, career changes that happened. So I took it 5 years later and competition showed up as number 2. So I was like, okay, I really have to own my competition. Mm-hmm. But the reality is it's not a competition against me, against you most of the time. It's a competition of myself. It's a process improvement. I want to be better today than I was yesterday, last month, last week, last year, basically. And so that's how competition shows up in me. But then when he took it a couple years later and I looked at it, I was like, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. And so he has focus and context is number 1 and number 2. And so, I mean, you ask him, you ask him what time it is, he'll tell you how to make the watch. And so, and it will go on forever about it. I'm on to another subject. I'm like on my, if we're on the phone, I'm on my computer, like answering 5 emails, and he's still going pontificating on whatever I've asked him about. And then activator, achiever, or 4 and 5. And so when we figured that out, he actually started to use it against me. And so in that, we as wives sometimes have to-do lists for our husbands. And so whenever I'd say, well, I gave you this list, when are you going to get to? And he's like, well, I have activator, achiever. I don't want to start it unless I can finish it. He was like, oh, how is that possible? And I gave activator in him. I gave it a nickname. I call it Giddy Up. And so because for him, it's come on, giddy up. Let's go.
Yeah. No, that's great. How often do you think that, and we're going to get to the story of both the cancer and the stroke here in just a second, but today, how often do you guys think it's referenced in conversations that you have? Is it a weekly? Do you think every day something comes up? But just as you think, because you're so well versed in it, what do you think? How often do you guys reference back to some theme?
Because right now we're in this kind of, it's a rinse and repeat our pandemic normal. I think it's more like every month or so, or maybe even like every other week or so, like he'll do something and I'll say, oh, well, that's your, this or that. I'm way more, because this is what I do for a living. I'm way more versed at it than he is. But here's the thing that he actually came to me with is an idea that I have been pondering in my head about 6 or 8 weeks ago. He came to me and he said, and after the stroke, everything's kind of changed a lot. He actually said, hey, I wonder if my strengths are still going to be the same. And I'm so glad that he volunteered it, because I wonder the same thing is how changed are we after a major brain event such as a stroke, and are our strengths going to be the same? And in reality, I think that his strengths, it's going to be interesting to see, because he's not fully ready to do it yet. His brain is still rewiring itself. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a little bit. But I think his activator and achiever are still there, because he wakes up every day with a purpose. Sure. And I'm convinced that that's why he's been successful in his rehabilitation throughout the stroke.
Wow. Yeah, well, you'd have to. I mean, 2 major health crises. And then continuing to have that drive to get better. I think we know oftentimes the will of the patient can sometimes dictate the amount and the speed of recovery. And so I think we'll spend a little bit of time, doing that. You mentioned, I kind of want to preface this question. I'm going to show a picture for some that could be a little bit of alarming. So I want you just to prepare yourself for that. If you need to look away, that it's not graphic, but it for me, for a guy who has claustrophobia, I kind of winced at a little bit. So I just kind of want to warn you before we move into this. Don, your top 5. Okay, so we think about you became the caregiver during these 2 crises. That I'm assuming that your top 5 make you a natural for that. Is that true?
Not even close. So if you look at my top 10, 5 of my top 10 are in strategic thinking. 4 of them are in influencing, and then only 1 is in relationship building. I don't have anything that smells like executing until number 13, 14. And then even my bottom 5, that's where you'll find harmony and empathy and includer and, all of those kind of soft, fuzzy ones that have that natural caregiving kind of more element to it. Not that, you can be, I've seen very tough people have a lot of harmony in them too. I don't want to kind of caveat it in that kind of way. But in terms of how I use my strengths, it is not a natural caregiver kind of mentality, but I have a strong faith, and God gave me this beautiful man who has a lot of health issues. So I've had to use my crisis management skills that I learned professionally and my natural armoring, my natural strengths that I had through the experiences that I have, through the strengths that I was born with overall, and all of those other things to kind of get us to the other side whenever we do have those challenging situations. I don't call myself a caregiver, by the way, Jim.
Okay, if you don't call yourself a caregiver, what would you consider yourself as?
I call myself a care coach.
Okay.
And
So what's the difference? How do you see the difference there?
so the way that and that actually came to me while he was enduring the 24 days in ICU and inpatient rehab after the stroke. So caregiver, encompasses all the loving aspects of, everything that you would encompass in terms of a caregiver, right? But that's not all that I do. It's being an advocate, it's being proactive, it's being an ambassador, it's helping, leveraging the strengths that your loved one has to really kind of rally them, to remind them of who they are. So then that way they can get to the other side of it, because especially when depression sets in, or, all the challenges. He was 100% paralyzed on his right side, couldn't even open his right eye nor speak for months after the stroke. And so care coaching is all of those things that will allow you to remind them of who they are. So then that way they can kind of rehab themselves in that kind of way.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great term, care coach. I like it. It's one of those, and I don't know if it's for everyone. I don't think this is. You certainly didn't decide to go into care coaching, right? It was kind of. Do you feel like that? Would that translate, Dawn? And this is just kind of off the cuff question, but would that translate? Do you think you could help others in this area where they're going through trauma and crisis? You wrote the book Armored. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. Does that translate, or was it special because he was your husband?
It was definitely special because he was my husband. And I will tell you, Jim, also, it was also special because we had gone through other battles, and which with each health issue that he had, I picked up tactics and techniques and procedures and processes and things like that along the way that worked for him as well as that worked for me. Now, the systems and the things that and the thought-provoking things that that I utilized while I was working with him, those techniques can be taken by other care coaches for their loved ones to kind of help them to along the way. But do I want to take that on and do that for other patients? I think that's the question that you were asking.
Right. Could you translate that to and help other people who are going through these kinds of crises in this way?
Yeah, that's not really kind of that's not where my passion lies.
Sure.
My passion lies in the care coach.
Okay.
My passion lies in those people that feel ill-equipped because they don't feel like they can, with the education, experience, whatever that they have, they can help their loved one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that
I hope
that
I
helps.
answered your question.
Yeah. No. Right. Yeah. No. Right on. I think there'll be some people interested in that, by the way. And so let's add some pictures to this. And so, as we think, and we can kind of look at this is Darren kind of going through chemo at this point, right?
This is the radiation mask. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he's right. This is, how long ago is this and what's happening here?
So this is 2009. He was diagnosed with stage 4 head and neck cancer. I found it in his lymph nodes. I never found the primary. So he had 6 weeks of chemo where he was going every week, and then 7 weeks of radiation where he was going 5 days a week. And so this is the radiation mask. They basically clamp you in and then radiate through your mouth, every day for 7 weeks. He lost 85 pounds because of it. And so it was phenomenal in that it saved his life. He's now an 11-year cancer survivor, but it was pretty barbaric in terms of just the experience. And as you said, it's not for the weak of heart by any means, because you can't be claustrophobic to have to endure something like that.
That, like I said, that caused a physical reaction for me when I saw that picture. I was like, oh my gosh,
I know.
I hope that never, but I think it brings to light kind of what he went through. You kind of mentioned, I think, in the book that the cancer and surviving cancer and the cancer treatment got you ready for what was coming with the stroke, and you didn't know that was coming. Can you kind of explain that?
Yeah. So here's just an example, right? And so allowing other people to help you. And so I learned that very early on in the cancer battle when people would contact us and say, like I said before, we have a great network in Houston, some wonderful friends. Our family is all back in Louisiana. And so I had people were reaching out to me and saying, what can we do? How can we help? And I was like, oh, we're okay. We got this. Just pray for us. And it was actually one of my oldest, my uncle's oldest friends who contacted me, cancer survivor herself, who basically said, people aren't only asking for you. They are asking because they want to be part of the journey. Now, great, you're going to be the recipient of it, but it blesses them to be a blessing to you. And so let them be a part of your story. And that really opened it up in a different kind of way. Had I not had that experience with the cancer battle, I would not have been prepared for it when he went through stroke, when I really needed a lot of support, even more than I thought. Yeah. But here's another really good example, too. One thing that I learned, and he was about halfway through the radiation. We would go once a week. He would go every day for the radiation, but once a week you would go to your radiation oncologist appointment. And his radiation oncologist nurse, a guy named Gary, walked in one day and he said, oh, you're still here. And I said, what do you mean I'm still here? Of course I'm still here. Where else would I be? And he said, oh, about this part in the program, the significant others, like, peace out. I can't handle this. And this is not a judge. I'm not saying this by any judgment, Jim, but the reality was it just did not even come into my mind. It didn't cross my mind. Well, about day 3 after the stroke, he's in the bed, like I said, completely paralyzed on the right side in ICU. It's like 2 days after Thanksgiving, and he's just crying. And I remembered what Gary had said. So I got in the bed with him and looked at him eyeball to eyeball. And I said, I'm not going anywhere. You can't get rid of me that easily. And I just kind of made a joke about it because that's kind of the nature of our relationship. But carrying those memories is really important also, because your patient is going to need to know that you are in it with them for the long haul. And it's that constant reminder also.
Mm-hmm. It's said so well. Well, let's bring up a little better of a picture. What's right? He's smiling, thumbs up.
Yeah.
What's happening here?
So this is week 6 of chemo. This is before the mass picture. But okay. Here's the story here, is that at the very start of his cancer battle, here's his significance coming out. It was 2009, so Facebook is fairly new at that point. And he wanted a photo diary every week of his experience. And so, for me, I thought me of little faith at that time, because I was really concerned of, stage 4 cancer. My heart was here. I took a big gulp, pretended like I wasn't going to cry, and reached into his bag, because our phones were not our cameras at the time, and reached into his bag, grabbed the camera, and he documented every week of his journey throughout the cancer fight. Well, that became his testimony. And so he actually informally and not for money coached other similar cancer patients through their own battles through that documentation. And there's a picture actually of him holding a bottle of Myoplex. And so it's a really good example of him. There it is. That's a Facebook post that he did of himself right after. So like I said, he lost 85 pounds. And then it's him kind of documenting his own story. So when he was going through the stroke battle, he couldn't document it for himself. So that's when another lesson learned, that I actually took his cue and I was documenting it all along the way for 3 purposes. One is, like I said, we have a big family. None of them are here locally. So it was updating everyone on what was going on and whatnot. The other was, it was a way for me as a call for prayers as well. But then the third aspect of things is that it served as this documentation, because I just knew that he is here for a reason, and that is to inspire others and to help others in their own journeys. And so that was kind of the reason why I put everything together to ultimately create the book Armored.
How do you think your top 5 played into that? And as far as putting a book together is not an easy task. In the middle of crisis makes it even harder. How do you think you leaned into that, or what in you helped do that?
So I've always had this desire to write a book, like for 20 years. And so it wasn't going to be this book, of course, who knew what life was going to throw at us. And so, but when COVID hit last March, it was nail across the record in terms of my consulting business. I had nothing but space and time. And so I had been writing through my business a blog post every week. Little did I know that was preparing me. I've always loved to write, but I write for me. I didn't know that other people would enjoy and experience it. Writing that blog post really actually was preparing me to write this book. She poured out of me. I call it a she. She has her own persona now. It's 30,000 words in 3 weeks last spring. She just wrote herself. And so, but the reality is I was using the input that I had, because how you self-publish is a whole different process, how you design it, I reached out to this network that I had to be able to make this a reality, and released it on October 1st of last year. But it was leveraging every single strength that I had along the way. Probably some competition took place in there too. Maybe a little command.
Somebody had mentioned that in the chat room before, of that competition playing into this, right? That theme for you playing into it. Who's it written for? I mean, who are you hoping will read this?
So it's written for me. And so people like me, in terms of people that feel that are handed a situation, whether it's a healthcare battle or it's a life challenge overall, and feel ill-equipped to handle it. And so just knowing that you have those natural strengths in you, that hard wiring to get to the other side, you just need to lean in to whatever it is. Look, whatever I did worked for us. I can't say it's going to work for you. I think it's having some self-awareness about yourself and about your loved one to be able to help, like, really take that mind's eye of, okay, what's going to work for us? And it's trying a couple things. It's a little bit of trial and error also, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Talk. There's a question in the chat room about the name. Again, talk a little bit about the name Armored and how you see it in the book.
So Armored is just that. Like I said, it's really using your own strengths, using your experiences, your hard wiring to really kind of rally up for whatever the challenge is there. However, the name Armored, it comes from Ephesians 6:11 through 13. There's 11 through 18 in the Bible, putting on the full armor of God. I have a strong faith. I'm a visual learner. And so that Bible verse, more than any, speaks to me. And so the inspiration for the name Armored actually came from Ephesians.
Okay. And then when we think about unique things that you did during these times, like if you were just to give some examples of how the two of you kind of harnessed the power of strengths to get through this time, can you give me just a couple examples?
Absolutely. I actually have some pictures. And there's a picture there, and you can see his strengths on it.
Give me a second. You keep talking and I'll bring that picture up.
And actual day 3 in ICU after the stroke, I was driving back to the hospital 5:30 in the morning. First full sleep since it happened, and heard this whisper in my ear, this is not my story. And so that became this anthem that for him, to tell him this is not going to be this paralysis, this aphasia is what the not being able to speak is called. The actual term is called aphasia. That's not his story. So I knew that I needed to remind him of who he was. And so that's when I came home that night, printed up all these pictures of ourselves and our lives to his significance, to remind him of our lives. Because, when you're looking at just a blank hospital wall, white hospital wall, you need some inspiration, right? So I came and I printed out all of these pictures of our lives, because we're big travelers also. And so I printed out all his top 5 strengths. Whenever I would see his physical occupational speech therapist, I handed them a copy of his top 5 strengths, talked about his strengths to them about him in terms, and just kind of made them aware of it. Then I also would document. So speaking to his context, he has to look back to look forward. And so I documented the milestones of the day. So in this picture down here, the very bottom of the picture, you'll see from the very first day, so a little bit further down, Jim, there you go. It was very rudimentary, right? So we're talking freezer paper so that the paint won't come off of the wall, so no one would fuss at me. And then blank pieces of paper that literally would just document the smallest things. So, I mean, I captured, him wiggling his finger for the first time. It was Sunday morning at 5:30 in the morning, most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And so from that to being able to use the walker to everything else. And every week I would go back and remind him, look what you were doing just that long, look how far you've come, everything else. And it was feeding that context overall so he could be proud of himself. Right.
Yeah. I'd almost like to take these off the wall, put them in the plastic sheet protectors and make a, have a day. Did you do it that way? Yeah.
Yeah, I have it. And so, because the follow-up of Armored is going to be his story. Yeah. Originally, it was going to be a story of both of our perspectives, but he can't get to those feelings and those words just yet. And, but he's getting closer. He's getting much, much closer. But, his medical team asked me, how did you do that? About day 4 or 5, they said, how did you do that? And it was only then, because I was so tired and there was so much coming at me, right? I didn't even acknowledge that it was my strengths that I was using to do it. And then about day 5, when someone said, how did you know how to do that? I was like, oh, I was using my CliftonStrengths. This is my input and individualization and ideation and overdrive, right?
I love the fact, and I never would have thought, listen, I've been doing this a long time, and I never would have thought of posting someone's top 5 in their hospital room to help the nurses. I mean, you think about this. You have new nurses coming in all the time. My son 9 years ago had a horrific skiing accident, spent many days in the hospital. We spent a lot of time in Denver recovering him. And less than it actually they thought, which was great. It was a miracle on itself. But there's always new staff coming through, right? And how great that was. Do you feel like, because they rotate through, but you get to know some of them in the process. Yeah. Did you feel like they picked up at all on the strengths language over time?
They picked up a little bit on it. They were just most impressed that we were that self-aware in terms of knowing how to motivate him. And here's the other thing about putting the pictures up, because it personalized him to them. So you're right. There's a constant recycling of those folks. And so the new team would walk in and then they'd start looking all over the walls. And so they were like, where was this? And where was that? And how about that? And so it personalized him in a different kind of way. So here's another example too. We were supposed to have our big Christmas party at our house. His stroke happened on the Tuesday. It happened out of nowhere, basically, which I know a lot of strokes do. We were supposed to have a big party at our house that Saturday. So we were going to have 120 people come to our house for an open house to celebrate Christmas. So I had been cooking and baking and everything else for weeks on end. So I basically started to take some of those goodies, especially the baked goods, and I kind of rationed them out throughout the week. So then that way I would give the staff some of the, and so I don't know if you watch Mrs. Maisel on Amazon Prime, but there's a show called Mrs. Maisel. She bakes this pot roast to make her husband stand out. And so one of my friends said, "You're so Mrs. Maisel." And so it was kind of fun in that way, because it was just another way of getting them to remind him. And I guess it's that significance, right? It's making sure that his legacy continues to stand out.
Yeah, no, I think, and man, it's such a great visual picture of, caregivers coming in and them having kind of a documented on the wall. I mean, it serves a bunch of different purposes, right? Yeah. It's a good reminder for him. It's a good reminder for you. We did the same thing where we wrote, every other day we wrote a post, an update on Facebook
Mm-hmm.
I go back into those posts. I can't remember what it felt like or there were moments that we forgot, just in crisis, you forget those moments.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like we go back and reread them all the time, but it's the 5-year anniversary and now coming up on the 10-year anniversary next year. We'll probably go back through those and read them again to be reminded. Now, you're going to document that in the next book that you do, right? You're going to go back and use that as documentation. But what a great idea to be able to do that. There was a question from the chat room that I wanted to cover about the book. Do you think, and I can't find it at the moment, but do you think, certainly your faith is important to you, and so your faith is very very prominent in the book. If there was someone who was not a Christian, would this book be okay for them? Is this something you could
Oh,
recommend for
absolutely.
someone?
Absolutely. Here's the thing. It's not denomination focused, right? And so whether you call it God or you call it the universe or whatever you're kind of looking towards, it's knowing that there's a purpose at the end of the day. And so maybe that's my belief talking, because belief is number 12 for me. But it's knowing that there's a higher power overall that is kind of the whole reason for it. And there's tips and tricks that I give, because it is a memoir in that it's a retrospective of our story, but the book itself actually is also me documenting and asking care coaching questions based upon the lessons learned that I've learned throughout the process. And some of it is very tactical. Like, do you have a central repository? If you have a loved one that has a lot of medical issues, do you have that all documented out in one place? If you don't, you can go to my website, and I've created a graphic, a male and a female graphic. So then that way you can document it all in one place, including their medications, because that's something that on demand, because as you can imagine, my 50-year-old husband has a lot of health issues and a lot of medications. And so I need a one-sheeter just to kind of describe it. I didn't have that before. So now I have it, and it's free and available to anyone who wants to just download it.
Where would they go, Dawn? What's the website?
It's DawnFLandry.com. So F is my Fontenot is my middle name. So Dawn, and it's Dawn F Landry.
Okay. All one word on that, and they can download that from there.
Yeah.
One more great picture we want to show before we actually talk about the process of writing a book, but tell us a little bit about this picture.
That picture right there is at the end of his cancer battle. And so after 85 pounds and a lot of, he was in full marination mode. After all of that, we had not heard yet that he was cancer free. But he also has a big faith. I asked him last year when he could get to some of the emotions. I said, is it your faith in God that's gotten you to the other side of this? And he said, no, it's my faith in me. And I thought that was incredible. Yeah. He has this will and this determination to not give up, that I quite honestly, Jim, I don't know if I would have the same amount of, after all of the different things that have happened to him, I don't know if I'd have that same gumption, but he really does.
Yeah. I love the fact that you recognize not all, because of the stroke, the brain is not functioning to its full capacity at this point. Things are happening and changing. Give us a quick, where is he today? I mean, how is he doing? How are things today? How's it coming along?
I appreciate you asking. Yeah. He is so good. It's like, oh, what a difference a year can make. I actually told him, I said, the world stopped because of the pandemic for you to incubate. And then here you are. And so he went through a lot of speech and physical therapy and occupational therapy all through last year. And speech wise, he's getting there. He can't get to all the technical terms, but he can get around. He can drive now. He's regained all of the physical, I would say probably he's like 85%. But like I said, he wakes up every morning with a purpose. He has something that he's going to do around the house. At one point, he was walking around with a caulking gun. Every little nook and cranny in our 8-year-old house has been caulked. And so, he has to have, his achiever has to have something to check off for the day. Yeah. And that is so inspiring to me. Someone asked me, they said, well, how can you stay so positive in the middle of all of this? I'm like, well, if he's not moping, what do I have to mope about? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, right.
Mhm.
No, it's not easy to. Oh, listen, that's easy to say, not always easy to do, right? From that
Yeah,
perspective, yeah. Anything else you'd add from an experience? I want to talk a little bit about
sure.
writing a book, because I think, okay, not only did you go through this crisis, but you kind of wrote a book in the crisis, and for coaches, a lot of folks feel they have a book in them that just needs to come out. But before we move to that, anything else you'd add, or anything else I missed that you'd want to share with our community?
Just one additional thing, and you referenced it a little bit ago in that I don't have a lot of empathy harmony,
Mhm.
any
Mhm.
high, any way high up. And the reality is, at some points, the challenge when you are a care coach to do that is that oftentimes that's what we need the most, is to give
Mhm.
ourselves the empathy and the harmony that we need to kind of get through and understand. I have what I call the drilled sergeant, and she sits on my shoulder. She's number one command, and she's like, "What is wrong with you? You should be able to do this, 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 and this." Well, after we were spit out the other side of the stroke last January, she was in full force, and I was not being nice to myself in my head.
Mhm.
And I had to create that awareness about, okay, I need to give myself some grace, because what we went through is quite a bit. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And so trying to just assume that I could go back to working again it was not a reality. So it's making sure that even though I didn't have the empathy harmony up, high, I needed to point that and figure it out and point it in my own direction.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's
Mhm.
good advice. And by the way, I think we need to come at that. I think to your point, individually, and
Mhm.
that's just, we have to kind of look at, okay, here we kind of have to step outside of ourselves for a minute and be like, okay, I have to stop feeling sorry for myself for a second here, or maybe in your case, a little too much intentionality, or a little too much drive, and
Mhm.
say, I need to back down a little bit. I need to
Yeah.
back down a little bit. So I think great advice. From time to time, we all need to take a step back, take a deep breath, do a little, maybe a little mindfulness, and get a grip. Like, okay, what's really important here? What are we really trying to do here? And then assess the situation, and continue to move forward. Certainly, you were a published author before all this, right? So this was a pretty easy process for you going through. No, you're saying no, no. So tell me a little bit about the process then of putting her together.
So I leveraged my network. Through my network, I had someone who is a book coach that I took a seminar last April. She had her own process, so I just used the quiet space to be able to do it. I look back on it now and I'm like, I don't know how I accomplished that. It's kind of amazing how it all kind of came together. But in so doing, I just knew that other people could benefit from the experience, from the tactical things that I had learned along the way. And especially let's face it, whether you're dealing with a pandemic or not, we are dealing with an aging population. And
Mhm.
so whether we have a health challenge right now with one of our loved ones or not, whether it's a aging parent or a spouse, or in some cases, unfortunately, like in your case, Jim, it's a child that has an accident, that we need to have some of those documents, have ourselves mentally prepared for it as well. And so when I created her, one thing that you do along the way is you ask for advanced testimonials. So
Mhm.
here's where my input really came in. So I dreamt really big. And to my surprise, I reached out to Jim Clifton,
Mhm.
chairman and CEO of Gallup, and he responded. And so he and his chief of staff, Christine, read her in a very early form, and they said, "Yeah, we're gonna give you a testimonial." And
Mm.
I'm so thankful. I am so thankful for that early vote of confidence. And so that's kind of how has gotten me here to be a
Yeah.
Gallup licensed partner now, which I'm very proud of.
Yeah, and you submitted that to us for review. Speaking of that, because that came a little later in the process, as we think about the things you know now that you wish you would have known. Now, I don't see you as a person with regrets. Like, I think you drive forward, and if you missed it, you missed it. If you missed the exit, there's going to be a party at the next one. So,
Mhm.
but if you think about that for a second and you think, okay, what would I do different on this, or what do I wish I could have done in a more maximized way? What do you think you'd say? Any lessons learned there that you might pass on to others who are thinking about writing a book?
Well, get yourself a great team, right? That's the thing. That's the number one aspects that you can't do this by yourself. And so it's not that I have a great team. So that's definitely not one of the regrets. Probably a little bit more preparation in terms of the timing. I just felt so called to get this book out. Probably, I don't know if getting it out in the middle of a pandemic is the thing that I would advise in the future, because of the timing wise, but I just felt so called to really publish it and release it and everything else.
Yeah.
So I'm a firm believer that things happen at the time that they need to happen. And then everything kind of flows in that way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Well, okay, but you did it.
Mm-hmm.
It's out. It's done. What kind of feedback are you getting on it? I'm certainly, as folks, you're getting, it's out there, right? Folks are reading it. What kind of stories are you hearing back?
Everything's been extremely positive. So this is, I told you when we were doing some of the early prep, I've done many podcasts for Armored, but I was so excited to do this podcast because I was able to talk about strengths specifically in it. And I didn't have to explain the terminology to you or to your audience. So have had an opportunity to, get a lot of press, both in the US as well as globally. Has reached bestseller status within the first month. I've sold over 1,000 copies of the book so far, and just continuing to identify new opportunities. In fact, one of the other Gallup licensed partners, your Richard Steary and Releasing Strengths, the Cascade product, he was going through his own challenging time with a loved one. He read Armored, and then he contacted me, and we've collaborated on a new worksheet for the Cascade product that was just released last week. And so it's been a tremendous collaboration. So it's just us partnering to continue the strengths movement. It's very exciting.
That's great to hear. I always love to see when the community, works together to do these kinds of things. So great on that. Okay. Let me ask you very seriously, how are you? Like, this is like, okay, you've put on a good shine on this. Like, this is great. Everything's awesome. Is it, how are you? I mean, how are you doing here? You still have a ways to go. We're not celebrating victory here at this point, right? You've got recovery still to do, and you're still in the midst of this, and we're just coming out of the pandemic. How are you doing?
I'm good. I am really good. Look, the reality is we all have challenging things that come with us. When Darren was in ICU the second time, I had a girlfriend that came and visited us, and she said, she was telling me, because we were visiting in the lobby area, and she said, she was telling me of some issue that she had, and then she stopped herself and she said, "Oh, but it's nowhere near as bad as what you're going through." And I said, "No, pain is pain. It doesn't matter if my pain doesn't have to be worse or better than your pain does. Pain is pain at the end of the day. And we just have to be there for each other however we can be." And I'm surrounded by some really wonderful people that I have in my life that I'm close to that really help me in terms of rallying and getting to where we need to be. But it's kind of owning where you are and being grateful for what you've been through. And we went through 2020 and I'm so thankful. That's my word for 2021 is grateful.
So, but any moments in there? I mean, certainly there have been some I want to give up moments. Have you struggled with that at all?
No,
Really?
I don't.
Okay.
I really don't. And so, but here's the thing, Jim. The reality is my husband he's the thermostat for how things are. And I didn't smoke anything before we got on the call.
No judgment if you did, by the way, no judgment.
Inhale helium or anything else. But I am so thankful because his perspective is one that's so positive that it does allow me to remain positive. But here's the other thing as well. I don't deal with the tough stuff until later. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing, but say for instance, in the cancer battle, I pushed us all the way through. And then he found out that February that he was cancer free. So it's like, okay, great. We're going to Hawaii for our anniversary. So our anniversary is in May. And he's like, "Can we afford it?" I'm like, "I don't care. We're going to put on the credit card and figure it out later." So here we are. We get off the plane. We're taking a shuttle to the hotel because we're going to get on a cruise ship the next day to take a cruise of the Hawaiian Islands. And the ukulele music comes on, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and I start crying. It's like I had been holding my breath for 7 months. And it wasn't one of those pretty cries either. It was an ugly snot cry. Yeah. And so, all the people on the bus, because no one had any idea. And poor Darren, he's just sitting there. He has no idea what caused it. And I'm just doing this, and all these people on the bus are looking at him like, what did you do? And he's just struggling too. And all I could say was, that's just how I process. I get to the other side and then I allow it. So you saying earlier about reading those posts back from your son's experience, I haven't fully done that yet.
Oh boy. All right. You've got some work ahead of you. By the way, I'm very similar. It's that in crisis, firefight, all adrenaline. I think we're probably wired very similar in this. Yeah. And you're in the moment and you like, there's not time to be emotional. We got to get through this. Right. And then at the end, there's a moment where you're like, all the emotion comes back.
Exactly.
I think the key is to let that. I think some people try to suppress that. Like, oh, I can't have these emotions. And you just need to have the snotty cry kind of thing, right? Just let it out. Right. Who cares? Like, you're never going to see those people again. Right. You're never going to see them. So just let it out. I think that's super key in what you did. So you may need to allow yourself to have some more moments like that, especially going into, I think though that, right? Those are going to come. You just kind of let them be what they are. Look forward to them in some way. It took me a long time to be okay with sad emotions, but there are moments I tell people all the time, it's okay to be sad. Be sad. It's okay. Like that's an okay emotion. So, I think it's just difficult. You've been through a lot. Give yourself some time to do that. Okay. So you alluded to this earlier of Darren taking CliftonStrengths again. Do you think like his brain's a little different now?
Oh, it's totally different.
Is he now? Is this your idea? Is this his idea? Like, when will you know? Like, how's that going to work?
I had been thinking about it for about, I would say 3 or 4 months. Definitely the latter part of last year. And then about 6 weeks, and I didn't tell him. I just wanted, I like everything. I just let him come to it. And then and oftentimes we're exactly on the same page. And so one day about 6 weeks ago, he said, hey, I wonder if my strengths are the same. And he does keep them up in his office in our house. And he said, I wonder if my strengths are the same. And I said, I was curious about the same thing. And he said, do you think I should take it again? And I said, I absolutely do. But I don't think that the time is, I don't think he's ready quite yet because you have to be willing, to be able to sit and concentrate for quite a bit of time and really kind of even get to some emotions. Yeah. And so I would say probably in another 6 months or so. I don't know if you guys at Gallup have ever looked at that or reached that or in any
there's been a little, I wouldn't say where we have any definitive on when or how or some of those kinds of things. That's, the brain is a pretty complicated, complex machine, right? And that takes a lot of that kind of medical research of knowing where and when and why. That's well beyond what we can do in our work, right? Yeah. That's with it. So it's kind of, we would say out of scope in the software world. We'd say that's kind of out of scope, but I think a really interesting case study for him. Like, I think this is one that you can kind of document and say, and the results will be super interesting. And I don't think they're going to change. Listen, healthy people taking the CliftonStrengths assessment a month apart, then they've been healthy. The chances of getting all 177 paired questions exactly the same twice, the odds of that are pretty astronomical. Yeah. Okay, that being said, with it, I think the discussion that comes out of it is what's more important than anything else. In other words, him taking the assessment again, a lot of things have happened to him, and so it's most likely going to be it'll be interesting. I don't know what it's going to be. You'll have to report back. But the coaching conversations that then begin with him and to say, okay, how are you? Okay, now that we know these things, what do you think? Like, how do you feel? What does this mean? And then the journey afterwards, right? How does that really play in? What does he see now? What's his brain doing? Like, I think that's super interesting. I think you have a nice little personal case study going on here
Yeah.
that's going to be interesting to say the least as you go forward. You're going to you mentioned you're going to write something else, right? You got to know what else is coming? What are you going to do?
Oh, his book is coming. But then
Okay.
I also
Okay.
have so business development is what I do for a living. And
Right.
so I have, now that I've written one book, I've proven to myself that I can do it. So I have a couple of technical business development books in me also. So, but I want to go, can I go back to the comment that we had before you asked that question?
Yeah.
So some fantastic advice that I got last January. So he's finished with all the therapy and everything in the hospital. We're back home. The whole fact that, you know, it's a whole sidebar in terms of they handed me this 215-pound man, and I'm like, here I am. I just hope I can care for him, right? And so that began the other piece of the process in terms of leveraging all of my organizational skills to be able to do that. But that's a total sidebar. I actually had an opportunity through my network. One of the folks that I've worked with in the past volunteered his mom, who is a retired speech therapist. And so one Saturday morning we talked, and so I gave her all of his medical history, his background, his age, everything else. And I said, so when are we going to get there? And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you know, we are get her done kind of people. When are we going to get there? And so she said, honey, she said, I'm going to tell you something right now. She said, you are looking at it all wrong. And it made me stop. And she said, if you think that he is going to be the person that he was before the stroke, then you are setting yourself up for failure. She said, you aren't who you were before his stroke. So that's not fair. And this is in my mind, this is what I heard it. I don't think she said it exactly like this, but this is how I captured it. Can you give him the freedom to be who he's going to be next? And that's in alignment with the conversation. That blew it wide open for me, Jim, because we both have the freedom to be who we're going to be next and create it. So I got off the phone with her. I'm like, you can be whoever you want to be next. And he was like, what does that even mean? And where did that come from? But in that process, it's allowed his activator to throttle back, his achiever to throttle back a little bit, to let himself heal it like he didn't have some deadline that was impending that he needed to work towards, that we could just kind of slowly get there overall and let it take however much time it takes.
Yeah.
And that really is amazing and beautiful.
I think that's just a great statement, kind of a great way to kind of wrap this time that we have to, listen, you and I could talk about this all day. I think I had you listen to Tracy, right? Tracy McCausland. Yes. She came in, she's just joining us. She said, I can't wait to listen to this one back.
Oh, yes.
And anything that going through that, right? This is why we record these things, is so I can recommend them to others. Anything, as you were listening to Tracy's cancer story, was there anything out of that, or anything you remember out of that you'd push forward to folks?
Oh, I just enjoy hearing her story and hearing the perspective of the patient. You know, that's the thing that I have. I can't say that I have cancer. I can't say that I have a stroke. I walked the walk as closely to someone on this planet, but no one has ever told me I have cancer. So I can try to empathize and get to those feelings, but I really don't know what it is. And so Tracy's podcast actually gives you the perspective from the patient aspect in terms of using your strengths in that way. And I really enjoyed it from that perspective.
I did as well. I think I might've cried on that one. I'm just going to be honest. It was quite moving. So Tracy, thanks for joining us. But I love to hear these stories, and we don't get to do them very often, but I love to hear these. So Don, thank you for taking a moment. Why don't we take a second and again, what's the best way for folks to get this, not just in the United States, but as we think globally, what's the best way for them to be able to get this?
So it's on Amazon, right? But then it's also offered in other channels. So if you're a Barnes and Noble or you're a Walmart or all.com, it's available out there. And then on my website, also donflandry.com, it's available there as well.
All right. Sounds good.
You enjoyed this.
Likewise. I appreciate doing it. You hang tight for me 1 second. Let's remind everybody listening live in the recorded version, get access to all the resources we have available around this. Maybe you've never thought of CliftonStrengths as a tool you could use in this. And then this could be a moment for you to give it a try. So head out to gallup.com/CliftonStrengths. Lots of information around that out there, almost too much, but it's out there and available for you. If you're interested in coaching, master coaching, or you want to become a Gallup certified strengths coach, we do that as well. You can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, and we love to walk you through that process. If the first time you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I want to hear more of this, or how do I find Tracy's time that she was on? Well, if you want to see what's coming up in the future, go to gallup.com or go to gallup.eventbrite.com. That's everything that's in the future. And then, of course, that site that I said before, gallup.com/CliftonStrengths, if you go to the resources tab and go to webcasts, they're all there. And the search actually works. So you can give it a try out there as well. And, of course, if you have any questions on a specific one, you can always contact me. Don't forget, you can find us on any social platform just by searching for Clifton Strengths. And if you're thinking about joining us for our summer summit, coming up June, well, it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere, June 8th and 9th, gallupatwork.com, and certified coaches, you get a discount on that as well. We'd love to have you come out and join us. Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it. Because we went a little bit long, we won't do a post show. If you're listening live, thanks for coming out today. Don, again, thanks for joining us. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.